WWE is the undisputed king of wrestling organizations in the United States, and honestly, for much of the world. They have a rich history going back as far as the 1950s, with ups, downs, and of course, lots of scandals. So when going about trying telling the complicated story of this massive organization, obviously, the best way to do it is to produce a shitty one-hour documentary. WWE Unauthorized was released in 2006 and promised, quote, a unique look at the athletes wrestling in the dank shadows of the McMahon Empire. But instead, viewers were treated to a big bowl of bullshit gumbo, barely scratching the surface of what the company is really all about. They get partway there at times, but trip over themselves with half-truths, complete falsehoods, and laughably bad B-roll. They're clearly trying to do something big with this, but in the end, it's just another lame cash-in on pro wrestling success. Just like this show, am I right? Let's dive in. The movie begins with a random homage to Star Wars of all things, explaining how they being so bad for making this totally unauthorized documentary. They go out of their way to make fun of WWE's legal team, mentioning that they had a typo in their C&D letter. That's rich considering the back of the DVD cover for this movie has two of them. The documentary then steals one of The Rock's catchphrases and what the friggin' frag? Yeah! Oh yeah, I can tell we're watching a real winner here. The opening credits feature a bunch of scary words, heavy breathing, and a guy in his underwear wrapping tinsel around a 2x4 very menacingly. These guys aren't screwing around here, folks. They want you, the viewers, to realize that wrestling isn't all glitz and glamour like what you see on TV, that it's rough, it's dirty, it's gritty, it's cutthroat, and above all else, it's very serious business. So with that in mind, here's a terrible animation of the Big Bang.
Our universe began with a violent bang.
The narrator goes on to provide a brief history of wrestling at breakneck speed, from the ancient Greeks right up to the dawn of television.
And by 1960, the boob tube brought wrestling into living rooms all across America.
Get used to those random scream sound effects as they happen all the damn time in this movie. They always come out of left field, they're always inappropriate, and they're always hilarious.
With electrician, baby magic of it.
And was matched by another in the music industry.
That's good royalty free. As the title of this film and the intro suggests, this movie was done without the blessing of WWE, which means they couldn't get the rights to any of the footage of the company. Hey, I feel you guys, the struggle is real. Not only did they not use any WWE video, they barely used any still images either. The movie uses 2 photos of Vince, 1 photo of Austin, 1 photo of Bret Hart, etc., and all of them were taken by non-company photographers. They did manage to get interviews with then WWE workers Candice Michelle and Chris Masters, but you get the feeling it was part of some big press junket. It's not like their input was anything special.
Most girls usually tape in to make sure nothing falls out, but sometimes I don't.
Do some muscular poses, just a pyro. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that.
So when faced with the Herculean task of trying to document the world's largest pro wrestling entity, but without the rights to any of their footage, what do? Easy. Just get video from other places and hope it works out for the best. This documentary features tons of wrestling footage, completely disconnected from what the movie's actually talking about. There's a fair amount of video of the Empire Wrestling Federation school in SoCal, but the bulk of the B-roll comes from the American Wrestling Federation, a short-lived entity that ran during the mid-90s with names like Tito Santana, Greg Valentine, Curtis Hughes, Bob Orton Jr., and Sergeant Slaughter. This Fed was best known for utilizing the round system in their matches, not unlike what TNA is doing today with the Grand Championship, but that's a story for another time. The point is, for a movie all about WWE, this movie features a ton of B-roll that has next to nothing to do with the subject matter. The only common threads are, it's wrestling, and that some of the people in the footage used to wrestle for WWE. And to those behind this movie, those loose connections are all you need to paint the picture of WWE. It's not a bad strategy, really. I mean, take a look at this scene from my latest side project. It's an upcoming documentary about the Spanish Inquisition. Let me know what you think.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
See? Works perfectly well. The movie goes all over the place more than a match in the Hardy family compound. It begins with a brief biography on Vince McMahon and his rise from living in a trailer park in North Carolina to becoming a wrestling kingpin. Then we transition into a 9-minute segment that educates the viewers about the physical and psychological pitfalls of wrestling, time away from family, injuries, addiction, and so on. I should point out, those 9 minutes are the only time in the movie when that irrelevant wrestling footage actually works out, because you can use any footage in there. If you want to talk about how hard wrestling is in general, then yeah, it's perfectly fine to use AWF footage there, but don't show me these two randos when talking about Raw versus Nitro. From there, the film takes a hard left to talk for a couple of minutes about backyard wrestling. They make a fleeting mention that some of these guys are inspired by WWE, but beyond that they make absolutely no connection between the company and what these dum-dums are doing in their backyards. Someone deliberately edited those two clips together like that. After that useless sidebar, the film turns its attention to one of the biggest and most pervasive problems in professional wrestling: talking heads in front of terrible backgrounds. Wait, that's wrong. I meant steroid abuse. Yes, folks, steroids. Apparently, every wrestler's taking them, just sticking syringes that are missing needles into their legs, squirting those steroids everywhere, then vigorously pumping iron with a single 20-pound weight, all while wearing their gear. That is how it works, right?
In the early 90s, 2 legal trials almost consumed the organization
And took the form of a large screaming orange man. Run, folks, run from what I think is supposed to be symbolism, but could just be more bad edits! From steroid use to the big steroid distribution trial the company was involved in back in 1994. They spent a total of 3 sentences on it before moving on. Oh yeah, way to stick it to the man, guys.
After the trial, several WWF superstars, including Hulk Hogan, admitted to steroid use and left the WWF.
Holy shit, that factoid about Hogan is so inaccurate on a number of levels. Let's break it down, shall we? First of all, Hulk Hogan's first public admission of steroid use took place in 1991 when he was a guest on the Arsenio Hall show. Second, Hogan left the company in 1993, before giving his testimony in the trial, not afterward. Either the writer of this documentary did a really poor job in structuring that sentence, or he was just flat out wrong. And if you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill with this part of the story, oh, believe me, it gets much worse. Unauthorized then takes a closer look at the Monday Night Wars and how the WWF changed the blueprint for modern wrestling by blurring the lines between fact and fiction. Case in point, the Montreal Screwjob. And speaking of blurring those lines, here's a Canadian sports writer who, by his own admission, doesn't know or care much about professional wrestling, trying to describe what happened on that fateful November night.
The idea of keeping the belt when he left the WWF was the most important thing to Bret Hart. Bret would have nothing of it. He said, I'm leaving with the belt and that's it.
I'm sorry, what?
Yet Bret Hart, because he's the hitman and because of his ego, thought he could make it happen.
No, he fucking couldn't. That's not what happened at all. Like, yeah, Bret didn't want to drop the belt to Shawn, but side note, that had less to do with the fact that it was in Canada and more to do with the fact that Shawn was being Shawn. But the plan was always to give the belt up the next night or drop it to somebody else after Montreal. That's been the established story for the last 20 years. Where's this jamoke getting his information from?
I found it odd to get a phone call from Bret the next day because I didn't even realize he was leaving the WWF.
But apparently, Bret and his dumb writer friend aren't the only ones getting everything dead wrong about this pivotal moment in wrestling history. For instance, listen to Vince Russo explain why Bret handing the belt to Shawn the next night on Raw wouldn't have worked.
Unfortunately, Bret would have been under contract with WCW the following night.
Bret's WCW contract didn't start until December 5th. They would have had a whole month to do something.
In one of the early rounds, and you could see the shock on his face.
Rounds? There's no rounds here, Shawn. This isn't the AWF no matter what that B-roll's showing you.
Michaels has him pinned. There was actually a gentle hold.
You mean the sharpshooter, which Bret was using as his finisher?
And the referee, I think his name was Earl Hebner, came in and called him 1, 2, 3, and before he knew it, he had lost.
It was a phantom submission, not a 3 count. Jesus, this is supposed to be one of your biggest and most pivotal talking points in this movie, and half the information is bullshit. But hey, we're not done yet, folks, because remember when Vince McMahon took this incident and used it to catapult himself to become one of the industry's top heels?
dubbing himself Evil Commissioner.
Did he do that, though?
McMahon's decision in 2000 to change the name of the federation from WWF to World Wrestling Entertainment made one thing clear. The business of wrestling was less about ability and more about marketability.
My God, I thought the chapter about Montreal was bad, but there are as many inaccuracies in that single sentence as there are in the whole discussion about the screw job. First of all, they're 2 years off when talking about the name change. WWF didn't become WWE until 2002. Second of all, even if they're talking about when they changed the full legal name of the company to World Wrestling Federation Entertainment, they're still wrong about the date, as that happened in 1999. Third of all, and most importantly, WWE has always been about marketability over wrestling ability. That's how it's always been since Vince McMahon has run things. Marketing and branding are at the core of everything the company stands for. Why else do you think I once ate 30-year-old gum? The film finally reaches its crescendo by talking about Owen Hart's death in May of 1999. And if you think the people in charge of this film are finally going to roll up their sleeves and treat this story with some dignity, Have you not been paying attention?
We had just, brought out Owen's old gimmick, the blue blazer.
That's the Pegasus Kid! That's Chris Benoit! Not the Blue Blazer, not Owen Hart, Chris fucking Benoit! You monsters! What have you done? Ah! Aside from this pretty unforgivable error, this chapter of the movie is actually done pretty well. They did a good job of detailing what went wrong with the harness that Owen was wearing when he was descending from the rafters, and they actually tackled the debate of whether or not the show should have gone on with some level of intelligence. The sports writer said it was a callous move for the pay-per-view to continue, while Vince Russo explained that it was impossible to make the right call as nobody was in the right frame of mind in the ensuing chaos. He told an anecdote about how Owen wrestled a match the night Brian Pillman died because that was his way of coping. The film doesn't try to make a judgment call about that night, but the talking heads did a good job providing their own case for each side. And then, after all that, the interview subjects talk about Vince McMahon as the godfather of wrestling, and the movie abruptly ends on this line.
It's a whole different world than what's going on out here, where we live. But I think Vince has lost touch with the real world.
And there you have it, folks. Breaking news, Vince McMahon is out of touch. Wait, did we have to buy this DVD to learn that? From beginning to end, WWE Unauthorized is a disorganized and factually deficient mishmash of themes, an attempt to talk about WWE and wrestling in general with a shotgun blast. It combines an extremely abridged history of the company with an incomplete look at what wrestling is really all about. The movie can't figure out if it wants to do a history of WWE or a condemnation of it, and it can't do either of them very well. If you believe this movie, the two biggest stories in the company's history are the Montreal Screwjob and the death of Owen Hart. But there are scores of other stories and events with equal or greater salaciousness that are either only given a passing mention or not even talked about at all in this movie. And good lord, that B-roll. It's one thing to work around the fact you don't have any rights to WWE footage, but it's a whole other beast to take footage of something entirely different, then try and line it up with what the movie's talking about as if they're connected. This was the first piece of footage they used when talking about Bret Hart, because, black and pink trunks. This is the shot they used when talking about Steve Austin because bald head. Just awful, awful overuse of this footage. And also, But at least the movie did a good job with a couple of things. They respectfully spoke about the sacrifices involved in becoming a wrestler, and for the most part, talking heads like Tito Santana, Shawn Asale, and Vince Russo were fine in their roles. If they had more than an hour to work with, both in terms of movie length and the amount spent on research, this movie really could have been something interesting. But despite what the back of the DVD says, it doesn't do much for either longtime wrestling fanatics, or recent converts. Be sure to thumbs up this video if you like it, comment below, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.